Hello, everybody, and welcome back to the Trip Sitting Podcast. On this week, we have Troy McFadden, who is the founder of Wisdom Warrior Coaching. He is a life coach. Now, I'm going to be completely honest with everybody here. For the most part, I think that life coaches were kind of just bullshit. I didn't quite see the need for them. I think I see a lot of people that are trying to be life coaches, and just overall my opinion of them was just like, this is just unnecessary. However, what I will say is, after talking with Troy, that opinion has definitely changed. Like, him specifically, the way that he talked, the way that he held space, and I also directly asked him, I'm like, what the fuck does a life coach do? Like, how do you discern the good ones from the bad ones? He was just such an amazing person to talk to. Just so smart, so full of wisdom. You could tell that he's actually really been through it. I think for me, it's like I see people that are my age, like, 25, 26 years old, that are trying to be fucking life coaches. I'm like, you haven't lived life yet. How do you possibly know how to tell somebody else what to do in order to live life? He is not that. On the other hand, we had an amazing conversation. He's also worked with a lot of different psychedelics and plant medicines, both not intentionally and intentionally as well. And it was just a fantastic conversation that I'm super excited to be able to bring to you guys. So without further ado, here is Troy. How long have you been? When did you first start kind of getting into like mindfulness?
I've always had a bent of nature, a predisposition to exploring things beyond the obvious, built in, part of childhood. I certainly wouldn't have called it mindfulness. I wouldn't have had the awareness to start labeling it, but I've always had an interest in the metaphysical, the spiritual, etc. When I was a little kid, I wrote a letter to Santa and I asked, are you related to like the Easter Bunny and other spiritual beings? So I think that's very telling.
Did he write back?
Then, I think so. I didn't really touch on the deeper issues I was after. Did eat some of the cookies I left out, though.
Of course.
And, as I got older, I was always open to these things, and I started to find out about, say, Buddhism and study it, and to a certain degree at that point, practice yoga, etc. And so it's always been part of my life.
Did you grow up with any like religious background?
No, not at all. I would say that my family was agnostic, bordering on atheist, but it was just kind of a non-issue. I remember my stepmother and I having a conversation, and I asked her about these things, and she said, I never think about it. And I remember even as a kid, my reply was, that's all I think about. and even though, yes, it would have been good to, I think it was Swami Vivekananda said, it's good to be born in a church. It's bad to die in one. In other words, it's good to be born into a situation where you have some opening, some predisposition to something beyond yourself, something spiritual. But if you never grow beyond it, that's the other part of that equation, then who are you, right? If you've never really found the truth for yourself. That would have been maybe ideal, but it was also not at all bad to have a blank slate with nothing crammed down my throat, so that I was free to explore things for myself and by myself.
I really love that. And like, that's something that I've been like focusing on, I guess, a lot, is like specifically just like the questioning aspect of things. And I think like religion did that for me, in which it sort of gave me this like slate of, here's what we believe is this religion. And like, I really, as a kid, like I remember taking that shit really literally. Like I remember truly thinking like Adam and Eve were like the first humans on earth, and like that's how life started. And then like, as I got older and, realized that wasn't the case. Like, I think that honestly, that story really started me wanting to question so many other things. And then also realizing just like all of the hypocrisy that goes on within all organized religion. Like, I don't care what organized religion that you are in. There is so much hypocrisy that goes on.
Yes.
and just made me want to like question the existence of God. And then, I went down the atheist route and then the agnostic route. And then it was definitely plant medicine that brought me back into the spiritual route, which I'd say is kind of like my current season of figuring out what my beliefs are. But like, I don't know, just challenging like a lot of societal norms and like what I believe in. Like I'm very much going through that aspect of my life now to really figure out like, what do I personally think is right, regardless of what anybody else thinks.
I think that's wonderful. A little more specifically, what arises when you share your story is one. Once you start to learn about, say, genetics and science, you might question: wait a minute, if Adam and Eve were the first people on Earth and they had a baby and their babies had babies, wouldn't they all have Down syndrome at this point, right? I mean, you start, and then as soon as you start to see through the hypocrisy in one organization or one aspect of humanity, I think you start to see the hypocrisy in our entire way of being, our entire fabricated way of being, because all organizations, just by nature of being composed of a whole bunch of humans, have at least a certain degree of hypocrisy within them, right?
Yeah.
You have people in the most altruistic organizations who are like power hungry and such. And this is all just part of the reality of what is, and then the possibility is how do we meet it? How do we navigate it? What resonates in us? What doesn't? What's true for me? Part of the art of life.
Yeah. So how have you gone about navigating that? Like once you kind of see past the veil and realize that there's all this hypocrisy in the world, like how do you go about, grounding yourself and like staying true?
It's been a process, and I've done it in very different ways at times, and I would say increasingly with grace and acceptance and love and compassion. Earlier on with a lot of rebellion, a lot of a lack of tenacity, and sort of getting caught, and probably what would be called disassociation, but and in part because of psychedelics and plant medicines, just seeing the cosmic absurdity of what we've created for ourselves and the predicament. And it's just like, I really couldn't continue with certain things with a straight face or to really buy into it. It all just seemed like these weirdly cartoonish games that surely you must see other person that you're engaged in. You seem to take it very seriously, but maybe that's part of the game. So all of these kinds of things, they certainly led me to lead a very unusual, out of the box, unorthodox, unconventional life, for better and worse.
Yeah. When did you first start working with plant medicine?
I'm going to use the term working with plant medicine and sort of interpret that as like consciously and reverently and et cetera. That came a little later. Like
actually,
most people.
let me then rephrase then, because I guess when did you first take any sort of psychedelic?
Yes,
because
sure.
I want to hear how long it then took to start consciously, because there's usually a gap.
Yes, and I don't know how unconscious I was about it, except perhaps in the case of marijuana. So I'll use that as the first, and like most people in our culture, it started recreationally. And I was relatively old for people that smoked pot. I don't think I even tried it until I was 16 or something.
I didn't try it until I was like 18. So
okay, great. We're late bloomers.
Yeah, exactly.
We waited until the resins and the buds were really sticky. Maybe we knew what we were doing. Mushrooms, I believe, were the next psychoactive compound, and that came late teens. I can't remember when, maybe 17, maybe 18, and that was incredibly eye-opening. I mean, just to zoom out here a bit, very generally, if it was not for these compounds, my life would have been very different, much harder, much less joyful, but perhaps we'll get into that later. I honor them with an enormous amount of reverence at this point. But at that stage, it was experimentation and fun and stepping out of the norms, etc. And then, I would use throughout my life, I started, pardon, I would start to use, LSD or whatever in this kind of like self therapy without really knowing what I was doing. But increasingly, I started to use it medicinally. I didn't think about it at the time. Um, on many times I would say take a bag of mushrooms and go out into the desert in the Southwest somewhere for a few days by myself and just use it as this kind of desert ritual purification. And then, of course, I would also, roll around naked in the mud at a rainbow gathering on them too, which in its own way is a reverent spiritual act. But they've always been part of my life. Sometimes it would wax, sometimes it would wane. And then in the last, I would say maybe decade, I started to connect more with ceremonial use, ritual use, very conscious, intentional use of ayahuasca and wachuma, San Pedro, and also mushrooms. And I think I have more to give in that kind of context because it's part of it is serving the community, and I'm also buoyed by the community and supported. I don't think it's better or worse, but it's a huge component, and it's certainly the traditional way that humans have ingested and bonded with and had a relationship with these entities.
Yeah. I like that you talk about how like, there's no sort of better or worse in the way that you're using it. Cause I talk to a lot of people within, this psychedelic community, which I use that term very loosely because it kind of means people that like brand themselves as using psychedelics, but also kind of includes everybody who uses psychedelics. But like, I think within the more people that sort of really brand themselves as like, working with it and stuff, like a lot of them have still really like strong opinions on like, no, like this only needs to be used in like this ceremonial setting, like consciously for healing, and like anything else is like bad and wrong. And like, we're also still humans at the end of the day. Like we're allowed to have fun. And that's, that was my intention before we started. Like part of life is to have fun and like not take shit so seriously all the time. And like psychedelics specifically like helped me with that. Like that was like a huge thing. It's like I took everything just like so seriously and like so literally. And like to your point is, once you kind of zoom out and see just some of the absurdity of just the things we do on like a normal basis, like it's hard to unsee that. Like,
nor would we want to necessarily.
yeah,
Want to
exactly.
go back into the matrix?
Yeah.
Hook ourselves up to all the tubes and wires again?
Yeah, exactly. Like it's, but like, well, here's the thing though, is then like, if you're not using them consciously, subconsciously, you probably will just slip back into those norms because that's what you're used to. So that's where like the conscious use of psychedelics have now sort of helped me like, I don't want to say permanently live outside the matrix, but like I'm a lot more aware of when I'm doing things that are, just because everyone's doing them and like this is normal versus like very consciously doing things like against the grain because I want to, and like trying not to care about what other people think.
Yeah, I think that there's something to be said for the fact that some of these compounds, some more than others, actually do rewire things on a neurological level. And if we don't integrate them, then they are of limited value at most and potentially dangerous for various reasons in their own way. And of course, the only way that we're going to stick with anything and actually evolve, at the very least make changes, if not evolve, if not actually transform something, is if we bring whatever came up during the experience into the light, behold it, accept it, acknowledge that it's there, and then start to work with it, start to embrace it, right? Start to include it in the whole. And yeah, the more consciously we can utilize these things, the better. But a huge part of it is just seeing the levity that exists in all things, the delight in how the cosmic mind manifests things, the beauty, the playfulness that's underlying everything.
That's so
it's
beautiful.
funny on one level. Like, some people upon achieving enlightenment just burst into like uncontrollable laughter for days. Like, that is an aspect of it. I'm going to be serious about my spiritual growth. Well, sure, at times maybe that best serves you, but you know, can you laugh about, the ridiculousness of such a
Man,
statement?
it's funny you say that, because like, so I've only gone on, I guess, experience ayahuasca like one time, and I say one time because it was just one retreat, but it was 3 times over the course of the retreat. And my very first ceremony going into it, like, you're, at least I was definitely like nervous, and like, still had expectations of like what I wanted from it and what I wanted it to be. And basically all that happened that first ceremony is I burst into uncontrollable laughter and could not stop for like 2 hours. And it's me and 7 other people in the Maloka, and nobody else is laughing at all. I am the only one, and I'm so loud, and I felt so bad. And the more I tried to stop laughing, just the more I kept laughing. And it was literally like, I remember thinking, like, why am I laughing so much? And it was like the absurdity of just like what I was doing, like the fact that like I'm taking this spiritual journey like so seriously, and I just flew 5,000 miles to go do this thing with these people I do not know in this place that like I have no idea where I am. I'm like, this is absurd.
I'm glad you had that experience, and I'm glad for the others that they had that. And I don't want to minimize the reality that like people purge and express in all kinds of different ways. Tears aren't necessarily, better than laughter, for instance. But I remember Don Juan in the Carlos Castaneda books saying, I choose to laugh because it makes my body feel better. I mean, which is a very simple, salt of the earth way to say it. But beyond the way that we engage with and express during those times, I mean, if you don't have a sense of humor in this world, you're blocked from this beautiful, and to me, what is a divine source of support through life. It is a crack in the cosmic egg. Yes, it's this, and you experience all the trauma and all the pain of separation, of the illusion of separateness. But I gave you humor. I gave you humor for yourself and to share with others. And it's as much of a gift, if not even more of a gift, than the psychedelics are. But I trust them more because they have a sense of humor, especially mushrooms.
Yeah. No, I get super giggly like on any type of psychedelic. I get super giggly into like I've gone through experiences where like a painful memory comes up, and like I'll cry and release to let it go. But like even during the experiences where like nothing's coming up and I'm just having like a grand old time, like my eyes will just be like leaking, like, and I'll just uncontrollably, like not even crying, like literally just like leaking tears, and like I'm still just having a conversation, and that's just happening, which is always funny.
Yeah, wonderful. And it actually does help to restructure our beings in like remaining in joy for a sustained period. It has a lingering medicinal quality, if you will, far after the laughs have subsided.
Yeah. So I guess I am curious, because you said at the beginning, without psychedelics, you probably wouldn't, be as joyful as a person, just how much it's helped you. What were some of those first experiences like that, caused those changes?
Well, again, the idea that it takes us back to a childlike innocence, where we're removed from the stories and the patterns and the habits that are artificially constructed by our personalities. What essentially is our personality, right? And just to experience our senses anew, colors and sounds, or if not entirely new, then at least in novel ways. So, I mean, that's one significant aspect of what they have provided me with, invited me into, is just to continue to live with an underlying childlike sensitivity to life. An openness, a playfulness, a readiness to engage in playfulness and expression, self-expression, and curiosity, openness to possibility. And of course, then based on those tendencies, I made certain choices to explore X or avoid Y or whatever it was. I mean, they just helped me along my way through life just to ultimately become more fully human.
Yeah. Like stepping into that humanity, which is, as you mentioned earlier, it's like, the parts of yourself that maybe you don't necessarily want to be aware of or know, the unsavory parts, and then accepting them as part of yourself and integrating those parts back into your life. Like that's the humanity in all of us. The fact that like we're not perfect.
Yeah, absolutely. It's a huge aspect of it. And again, I don't want to minimize that part, but when you're attuned to divinity and you're seeing the lightness and the absurdity of our situation, then you can bring these things forth and like, that was really painful. That really hurt. I've had a lot of difficulty with this. Here's how it's getting in my way. But it is part of my humanity and it's okay. And everyone has some version of this. And can I take care of myself enough? Can I love myself enough? And can I therefore accept this in others and love them along with, at the very least, despite, but ideally along with this aspect of themselves, because here we are together. And that would be another major thing that psychedelics has shown me, that whether others recognize it or not, I see that you're my brother or sister or other, and here we are. And going forth with that spirit, that sense of a collective, rather than it's all about me and I've got to fight my way and dominate and all the shit that we see playing out, right, on these world stages by these very deeply wounded, traumatized men, mostly, has been like not only completely unattractive, but I just see it as the sickness that it is, the illness, the imbalance, so I can live otherwise.
Yeah. No, I completely agree with that. And like you become a lot more empathetic and compassionate once you start doing your own like healing work too. Like it's just a byproduct of it, because like everything that you go through and like you see in yourself, you immediately can see in somebody else. You're like, oh, that's why you act like that. Like, because I'm like, well, this is why I acted like this. So when somebody else is like, oh, like shit, like there's some underlying trauma there that like we don't want to deal with,
Yes.
which is fine. And like, you can't make people deal with them. And so like, I choose to try to transmute that basically. Like, I think the only way to really solve these issues with people is like literally just spreading as much love as possible, like truly
Mm.
unconditionally loving others for their brokenness and everything that's there without trying to change them. That's the only way to solve it. And it sucks because that's the longest way possible. That's going to take the longest amount of time, but like that's the only way to like truly do it, in my opinion.
I definitely agree with you. It's ultimately about the love, and then it's about experiencing that, feeling that, being connected to that underlying love that underlies everything, and then skillfully expressing it. And that's perhaps what takes a while. But that immediacy of love, when conveyed to a person, it probably does have immediate effects. It may not be the slowest way to do it, because it is from an absence of experiencing love that a lot of these people go down the path that they do. And it's definitely what you say. As soon as we recognize it and accept it in ourselves that it is, then we can more easily see it and ideally accept it in others. And then we have a better understanding of all of the dynamics that make us human. And we can create greater significance with others and just share space with them, which is maybe one of the definitions of love, rather than creating separation. And that is the problem with the world.
Mm. I'm just going to pause for a sec just because I like that so much and just like sit with that. So with that in mind, I guess I want to go back and I guess hear about what were some of your more challenging experiences with psychedelics that really helped you
Yes.
understand it, because like those are the ones, at least for me, that like really drove the nail in to say like this is what you need to integrate, like this is it. So I'm curious what those experiences were like for you.
Yeah, sure. Well, especially when one is by themselves, it's harder to hide, right? Things come forth. It's harder to distract, which is why community is so helpful, and yet why once you're, uh, I guess, grounded enough and trusting enough in the process that you can journey solo and be with whatever comes up. I'll just start in part as kind of a warm up with one particular story, which also contains humor, since that's one of our themes.
Yeah.
I was like maybe 19 or 20 or something, and I had decided to take some acid and just hang out at home in my apartment. I think I was living in Portland, Oregon at the time. And I was going through a real funk and just feeling really depressed and down. And I don't even remember what it was about. And I remember going in the bathroom mirror and looking at myself, which is the classic, like, don't do that, And I looked at myself for a while, and I think I even said it out loud. I don't know whether I'm just too down to get high or too high to get down. And I just completely cracked myself up, and I went and cranked up some music, and I started dancing around, and it completely shifted it.
That's awesome.
There are other times when I was out in the desert, and things would come forth about the deep wounding I experienced in childhood, and I had a really, really difficult, traumatic childhood for the vast duration of it. So while it might seem like some of the things I say are from a sort of the perspective of a Pollyanna, I earned it all. I did. So there was all kinds of wounding and hurt and anger and rage, even, and shame, and just embarrassment, and just all kinds of things. Many, many, many years of early childhood. We'll just call it the pre-psychedelic phase, that I've had to work with, and I continue to work with. But whereas one can sit and tell themselves and others that they're meditating, and even if you're remaining perfectly still, your mind's flopping all over the place. You can do yoga asanas and actually flop all over the place, and your mind is matching it rather than you actually doing something that's evolving your being. But it's very, very hard to not face yourself with psychedelics, especially with a plant medicine where there's a conscious guide ensuring that you look at whatever comes up. Yeah. And as painful as they can be, if you have a relationship established with the consciousness of the plant, you know that they're wise and all they're there to do is care about you, and they can help you get through it. So in that sense, I guess no one ever trips alone.
Yeah.
I've had, of course, painful memories, etc., surface, say in an ayahuasca ceremonies and such. But through time, I would just say that increasingly now, when I journey, there's not anything really new that comes up. I've now, with their help, shown the light and illuminated pretty much all of the corners. It's just more of like, let's go back in here and let's clean up a little further. Let's dust off the shelves for whatever residue has fallen as of late. And so I guess the process becomes a bit gentler, again, a bit more refined.
Yeah, like it's more so now about maintenance rather than seeing what's trying to find something new.
Yeah, I'm open to anything new, but that's the message I get is like, you're fine, you're beautiful, and while we're here, let's do a little house cleaning.
Yeah, no, I think I've, at least my last journey, like that was mostly kind of what came up for me. It was nothing like brand new that I wasn't aware of or anything. It was just a lot of like, you've been through some of these things before. You remember this, like, be gentle with yourself, be caring, be forgiving, give yourself grace, and just make sure that you're doing a lot of that. Which is interesting because I guess for me, again, sometimes I like I think I might get a little bit too like serious about it and be like, no, like I want to go deep. Like I need to see like these parts of myself that like I don't know about yet. Like I want it to come to the surface fucking now. But like that's not, being present. Like it's if it's there, it's going to show up when it shows up. Like there's nothing I can do. There's no amount of medicine I could take to just make it come to the surface. Like that's the whole point of how our minds work and like how we heal, is like it happens in its own time.
Yeah, I think we are making a statement asking for greater or deeper support when we actually ingest a higher dose. There is some relationship there, of course. And, to the degree we bring any ego, like, I want this, I want to go deeper, whatever it is, medicines are going to respond always lovingly, but sometimes with tough love. I can recall a relatively recent journey to the desert. It was actually on a Native American reservation, and I was living in LA at the time, and really not in a good space at all. In part because the environment is not conducive to well-being.
Tell me LA.
I would say.
Tell me LA is not a real and authentic place to live. I'm from there, by the way. So
it's neither real nor authentic, despite there being a lot of wonderful people, of course, that are offering those kinds of things. But within this, fabricated, it's all kind of like a giant Disneyland, of course, as many people have said, La La Land. Regardless, I took the heroic dose, the 5 grams, and I went out, and I mean, it was like borderline, like, well, eyes rolling back in the head, starting to swallow the tongue, like, oh, this, I'm actually dying. Like, this is bringing me close to like physical death, as opposed to just psychological death and such. And I can remember like raging at the sky, like, bring it. I want it. I can take whatever I've got to experience here. Let's go. Give it to me. And that is very much a type of focused prayer. You are making a prayer, and you are asking the universe, and the universe always says yes. I'm depressed. Yes. I want you to give it to me hardcore. Yes. And subsequently, things got even more challenging for me, because I think the universe was responding. Oh, you want it hard? Okay. Yeah. Here's what it's like. So I've learned to be much more reverent, much more humble, come around with my hat in my hands. I'm meeting this at the gate of what is a shrine. I'm going to act accordingly when I'm within it, and I'm going to accept what comes. I'm not going to ask for more, because I'm going to trust the wisdom of these beings to provide what I need, only and only at the amounts that I can handle at any given point.
Yeah, that's like the divine trust in the universe that I'm supposed to be here right now having this experience. I'm not supposed to try to like control it.
Yeah, like what kind of like psychonaut is like greedy, and you're at the buffet, and I'm like, a couple of slabs of iboga root and a heaping pile of cubensis, and I'll take a sheet of acid, and and then I'm gonna have some ice cream for dessert. I mean, that's just spiritual materialism taken to the like gluttony level, which is part of youth, and it's part of exploring and part of experimenting in a culture like ours, which is already excessive in that way, and it also just comes with experience and time of like, I need less resources from this earth in order to take care of myself and to take care of others. And I understand the importance of leaving as many of them as possible, whether it's water or peyote or anything else, for those that are yet to come.
Yeah. So switching gears here, when did you start Wisdom Warrior coaching? And we would just love for you to like elaborate a little bit on it.
Sure. I started Wisdom Warrior coaching per se, I think about 7 years ago, and I had started working as a coach just prior to that with a different organization. And I really fell into coaching in this total back-asswards way. I think because it's exploded, and because it's a Wild West, and because it's unregulated, the bar is very low. So anyone and everyone can call themselves a coach, hang a shingle, as it were, as we used to say when I was young. And proceed accordingly, which isn't necessarily wrong. I think just on that note, if if the approach of coaching comes into the culture more and more, then that to me is like a reflection of our evolution, that we are more conscious, more widely aware as humanity of ways to engage with each other, to support each other, and to reduce judgment, and to, essentially be able to see and encourage people's own innate wisdom. I think it's great. But a lot of people, again, are motivated because, I can, the practical things. I can work from home, and I'll just, start a website, and I can just tell people what to do, and they'll pay me money. Yeah. And I see a lot of that. There's a lot of bottom feeders out there in the industry. And yet I'm sure there are some very, very sincere people that are like, coaching, that sounds interesting. And they do the training and they really honor the process.
How does someone who's looking to get a coach sift through the bullshit? Like, if I've never had a coach before, like, how the fuck do I know whether this person is legitimate versus this person over here?
Yeah, great question to ask oneself. You have to be discerning, I would say, intuitive. And I think to start with, word of mouth is the best way. Someone that you trust speaking highly of someone that they're working with. Now, an interesting kind of blocker, as it were, in that is that a lot of people seem to get attached to working with a particular coach, and even though they love their friend, they don't. And even though they trust the coach to hold things in confidentiality, they don't want to share that. Like, that's a little special resource for them. So it doesn't always work. It doesn't always
Selfish.
work that way. Well, I guess on some level that might be it. I'm not sure of the dynamics, but I would just say, maybe more fairly, there's just an intimacy that you create with someone else, and it's like, most couples want to just stay couples. Most couples don't have open relationships, or don't want to make it a throuple or whatever, and because they just honor that vessel and that container. So I get it, as far as that goes. But yeah, I can circle back to your original question, or we can go down this lane. Okay.
Yeah, circle back.
So I met this guy almost 25 years ago now, who was teaching on a 10-day silent meditation retreat in Thailand. American guy. He had been a monk at this particular monastery for several years. He had also been a Tibetan monk in Tibet, back when it was Tibet, for several years. This really eclectic background. Here's this guy he's a psychologist by trade as well, and what he did for a living at that point was working as a high-end executive coach. And this is quite some time ago, before people even knew what an executive coach was. And he was so charismatic and engaging, and just like, I was so drawn to like whatever he had been able to connect with in his life. So, long story short, very slowly over time developed a relationship with him, and I always felt a certain amount of desire towards what he did, because, as he described it, basically, I get paid a lot of money to tell rich people that they're assholes because no one else will. That, combined with the fact that he had grown up and went to college in the 60s, where he was part of the LSD experiments of the time, and actually tripped like in a lab several hundred times. That in combination with the monk thing, I'm like, I'm in.
Yeah.
A lot of other things about the work have been an acquired taste, but that's what got me.
Nice, man, dude.
Originally.
I'm in, like.
So, and then he reappeared in my life. We'd fall out of touch, and he'd reappear in my life in these really like mysterious ways that I just couldn't help but kind of trust. And ultimately, and he was very like tough love with me. He said, a couple of times, I'm like, do you think I could ever like do anything like this? And he basically would just say, you're not ready yet. You have too much ego, and you haven't felt your suffering. I'm not saying you haven't suffered a lot. I think you have, but you haven't felt it. You haven't experienced it. So you're less available for people than you need to be to do this. And of course, like I have so much respect for this guy, so it just hurts in my heart. But then on an egoic level, what do you mean I haven't suffered? You know? What do you mean I have a big defensive ego? The irony.
I don't get it.
He too has an incredible sense of humor. He's like a jolly Santa Claus, you know, at this point. So, for lack of a better word, he was this mentor in my life, kind of sporadically on occasion. And finally, about 10 years ago or so, this sort of organization of sorts kind of started forming around him. He would always say, "Oh, it's all intuitive. I can't teach it." But a few people really wanted to connect. They did. And I visited him at some point, and he's like, well, you're ready now. Come on board. So I figured this coaching thing out in this, very back-asswards way, this very lengthy way. And then also I've had to figure out the sort of, you know, the processes and the methodologies and everything belatedly, because his approach is just like, be on top of the mountain and serve from that place. And I'm like, yeah, but you got to find a route up there originally. And so I had to learn the mechanics of the process of coaching, you know, from that space. And now they seem to be kind of coming full circle, or I have the nuts and bolts, but I'm also able to inhabit that kind of non-self space on top of the mountain and just be in that intuitive realm and let things arise.
So I guess with that, what were you doing before the 10 years ago? Like, you know, what was your day job?
Oh, fucking around.
Yeah. I was just waiting. I was just sitting.
Yeah, right. Treading water. Well, as I said, I've had kind of an eclectic life, so there has been a lot of fucking around, that's for sure. But prior to that, for about 10 years, my partner and I had a yoga events business, mostly yoga teacher training. And we were primarily based in Bali, but we also worked in the larger Asian realm in Peru. It was called the School of Sacred Arts. And we named it as such in part to be as inclusive of as many practices that we could, especially beyond yoga, you know, because we were doing our medicine work, et cetera, which we started to bring into the fold towards the end of that tenure. So there was a bit of an overlap between that gig and this new one.
Mm-hmm. Gotcha. And then, so I guess, what was that transition period like of sort of like, I guess, did you give up like the School of Sacred Arts?
Yeah, we did. And the transition was involved me feeling less and less able to offer these kinds of intensive, especially these 30-day yoga teacher trainings and such. It's really hard for me to be in the weather of a place like Bali. It's just so hot and humid. It's just debilitating. Like, I'm going to teach yoga while someone's standing there with a fire hose and another person's there with a flamethrower. Ma, look at me. So it got to be more demanding. And I started to just feel less and less resonance, as much reverence as I have towards the yoga tradition. There's just other ways, I would say more Native American ways, both North and South, of relating to these things, because it's simpler, it's more heart-based, it's more in the earth. And, you know, the yoga tradition gets very complicated. And then, of course, the yoga industry was blowing up, very much like the psychedelic industry or the coaching industry is now, and it became more competitive and I would say more superficial overall. And it's like, I didn't want to be associated with it. So I started moving into small group facilitation and coaching with this other organization. But it got a little rocky financially because I was dependent on this business that I had built, and I stopped doing it. And it took a while to actually start making enough money as a coach, because it was never designed to be like, you know, a provider of full income. So yeah, it was a slow fading out of one, but as quickly as I could, and a slow entry into the other. And it takes time to be a really good anything, usually, right? Unless you're Mozart and you're 4 years old and you're just this prodigy, but like, you got to get beyond a lot of things and through a lot of things and into a lot of things to really be able to serve someone in a well, in this case, in a coaching capacity. So there was definitely a learning curve that I needed to go through for the sake of myself and others.
Yeah, I mean, you gotta put in your 10,000 hours, as I like to say,
Yeah,
which is an ode to Malcolm Gladwell's book Outliers.
right.
Um,
Or head towards that goal at least.
yeah, exactly. Yeah, exactly. Yeah, but like, it's the journey of getting there. Like, there's no shortcut to that. Like, you can't take fucking shortcuts. And like, I think a lot of the things that we see in our society is like people are trying to take shortcuts. Like, we don't want to put in the time and the effort. We want instant results because that's what this society just like inherently breeds. And man, I was such an impatient person growing up, and I still get impatient. I'm not going to pretend like I'm not, but like I can at least recognize my impatience now. And then typically I just start laughing. I'm like, oh, yep, okay, like here we go again.
Wonderful.
I'm back.
Yeah, wonderful. That's that part, right? Is
Yeah.
being impatient. Okay. Yeah, I think it's really important that we acknowledge the imbalance of the culture towards that. And now, it's about there's this hack and whatever, and it's just like there really are no shortcuts. There are quantum leaps in evolution on occasion, but most of evolution takes place almost imperceptibly over long periods of time, and that's the spiritual work as well. Most of it is in the trenches. Most of it is dealing with the mud and the dirt and excavating and opening things up. And as this mentor that I've been mentioning said, Troy, you're not going to pole vault your way to enlightenment. You're not going to have this sudden peak experience and just hurl yourself into this higher state and just be able to stay there. That's not how it works. Chipping away so that it's sustainable in part.
Yeah. As you said, a lot of it's spent in the mud and the dirt. And to go back to something that you said earlier about some of your psychedelic experiences, it's about trying to find a way to roll around and have fun while you're in the mud and while you're in the dirt.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, mud's great. Dirt's great. I mean, that's part of it. Can I love this too? Because this is part of the all. And if I don't, can I love myself for not loving it? Mm-hmm. Once again, to your earlier statement, it really is all about the love, because in that, the healing can just take place. The safety is there. Everything that needs to be there. Love is just sharing the space that we all inhabit, and getting closer to oneness, to unity, and less associated with separation, because I'll just come back to that is the essential ignorance that we're dealing with. We think, we believe that we're separate, and we act accordingly, fearfully and greedily, and all the things we do. Whereas to the degree we feel connected, we're going to act in a loving, supportive, generous, kind, respectful way.
Beautifully said. And on that, I want to thank you so much for coming on the podcast. And I really, really appreciate your time and your energy and your humor. I'm really, really happy you were here, man.
Cam, it's been such a pleasure chatting with you. Thank you so much.
Absolutely. Much love, brother.
Same to you.
Thank you all for tuning in and listening to this week's episode of the Trip Sitting Podcast. If you want to get in contact with Troy, I have linked to all of his stuff at the bottom. His website is wisdomwarriorcoaching.com. And then also, if you want to get in contact with me, please feel free to shoot me a DM on Instagram or TikTok, or just shoot me an email, tripsittingblog@gmail.com. Thank you again for tuning in, and we'll see you next week.